Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event from the Jesus College Intellectual Forum. You're very welcome when you are here in person in this wonderful web library, a space which captures some of the drama of past Jesuits. So every book you can see here was either written by a Jesuit or about a Jesuit. So do have a look. There are some fascinating books. You may raise an eyebrow about some of them, but they're generally fascinating. So you're welcome whether you are here in this lovely room or if you are joining us online. And thank you very much for being with us wherever you are. We've had people from well over 150 countries come to some of our events, so maybe you've added to the country list today. I don't know. My name is Philip Lymbery. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum here at Jesus, and it's great to be working with friends and colleagues from around the university and also the Protein Project. And I'll hand over to Lisa in a bit to explain today's event. Some of you will know Jesus College very well. For some of you, it's maybe your first time. We have a very, very long history, originally set up in 1144, when a group of itinerant nuns were given a little plot of land outside a tiny village that was Cambridge. It was then expanded in 1156 when King Malcolm of Scotland gave the rest of this land. More observant geographically aware of you may realise this is Scotland. He was also Earl of Huntingdon, and it wasn't Huntingdon either, so I don't quite understand how we had it. But anyway, he gave it to us. In 1496, the then Bishop of Ely said that there were only two women left in the nunnery. One was very elderly and the other was of ill fame. So he kicked them out and turned it into an all-male college, something we fixed about 45 years ago. We've had amazing people here who've gone on to really change thinking around the world. One could talk about people like Cranmer. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is one of an exhibition on some of his work, including his anti-slavery ode in the Marshall Room, just over in the old part of college. We've also had people like Lisa Jardine. We've had people more recently, even Clean Bandit. Do some of you know Clean Bandit? Yes, good, Rockabye. Very, very popular song, and many, many others. One of the most relevant people here, perhaps for tonight's talk, is Malthus, for his work about population and the limits of growth and food and how you feed everybody. We still have some of his earliest manuscripts in the old library here. The Intellectual Forum was set up in 2016 to help to get people to think and talk, to run events like this that reach out beyond the boundaries of our own college, to share knowledge out, to invite knowledge and wisdom in, and to really get important conversations to happen. We've had amazing speakers. Sarah Bridle talking about the carbon emissions from food. We've had Andres Forjax from the US company Modern Meadow, who's trying to use a number of alternatives we might talk about a bit later, and many, many other people from around the world. Most of our things are available on YouTube if you would like to have a look. I'll come to more of our events in the future. So tonight I'm really excited about, and I'm delighted not to be running it all for a change, which is lovely. So can I invite Lisa, if you want to sort of take over and set us going, and we'll then have this wonderful talk and then questions. And just say if you're online, do use the Zoom technique tools, the Q&A feature. I'll bring in your questions later. Those of you here can just raise your hands when we get to it. Lisa, thank you for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, and also hello from my side to all of you, and also the online audience. I'm Lisa. I'm a student here at Jesus, and I'm also part of the team running the Alternative Protein Society here in Cambridge. And it's really our goal to build a local community for a sustainable way to feed the world. And we are incredibly delighted to bring to you tonight Philip Lymbery with the help and join our forces with the Intellectual Forum and Compassionate World Farming. So Philip is Global Chief Executive of the leading farm animal welfare and environmental organization Compassionate World Farming. He is visiting professor at the University of Winchester and president of Eurogroup for Animals, and also founding board member of the World Federation for Animals. In 2021, Philip had as an ambassadorial role with the United Nations as champion for the UN Food Systems Summit, and was appointed to co-lead the Summit Sustainable Livestock Solution Center. Philip is also a dedicated animal advocate, a naturalist, photographer, and award-winning author of a recently completed trilogy, which you will be able to get your copy later with a signature from Philip. Okay, so without further words, just a note on the structure. So Philip will be talking for approximately half an hour, and then we will open the space for questions and thoughts. And yes, so over to you, Philip.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Julia. Thank you for having me here. Welcome to the online audience, and thank you all for being interested in our food future and alternative protein. Word on the book, all the royalties for the books go to the charity Compassion in World Farming to continue the work to bring better lives for animals, people on the planet. So, where to start? Well, Lisa mentioned the third in the trilogy, which is called 60 Harvests Left, How to Reach a Nature-Friendly Future. The first in the trilogy was called Farmageddon, The True Cost of Cheap Meat. And it was a book that I wrote with a now infamous journalist called Isabel Oakeshott. That if any of you in here are called Matt Hancock, her name will strike fear into your bones. But I went on to write a second book called Dead Zone, which was very much looking at factory farming and what it does to wildlife, which is wipe it away, essentially. The third book, 60 Harvests Left, is a book of hope and urgency. It's a book that is structured around the 4 seasons. It starts with the summer, which is pretty much where we are as a society, living a perpetual consumption party as if the world has no limits. But we can start to see the browning of leaves as we go into autumn. Talk of a climate crisis, of the collapse of nature, pollution, and the recent pandemic. If we don't do something now, we could be moving as a society into a perpetual winter. COVID-19 gave us a snapshot of what that perpetual winter could look like. It showed us that actually our society, which really has grown up on hubris, actually is quite vulnerable. The biggest part of the book actually is spring. And it's spring that I want to focus on this evening, because spring is about the wonderful life-affirming alternatives, the solutions that are at hand, be they regenerative farming or alternative proteins, that mean that we can quickly turn global emergency into a wonderful future for us all. So my name, as you've heard, is Philip Lymbery. I run a charity called Compassion in World Farming, which has a mission to end factory farming. I had the pleasure of meeting the founder of the organisation 33 years ago. A guy called Peter Roberts. He was a Hampshire dairy farmer who gave up farming because he became concerned at the rise of factory farming, the keeping of hens in cages, pigs in crates, and so on. And he started the charity. I met him 33 years ago. I went for a job. I didn't get the job. I got a call from him saying, "I'm sorry you didn't have the experience, but would you like to come and work for us anyway as an assistant?" And I did, and here I am, 33 years later. The books have been part of my life the last 12 years, certainly in the form that I've been writing. And my USP really is, so my books are based around a travelogue. And other travelogue writers, they write about wonderful cultures and fantastic countries, brilliant architecture and history. I write about going to visit the world's worst factory farms. That's my USP. But in doing so, I try to find that wonderful hope that we're going to in a moment. Now, I'm not a farmer, but I do live on a farm. This is where I live in West Sussex. I've always wanted to live on a farm because as a lifelong wildlife enthusiast and animal advocate, I just love living in the folds of a rural community where everything looks different every single day, where I can go walking and see kingfishers and egrets. A wonderful wildlife. And I should confess that I didn't write this latest book alone. I had a writing companion. It was my companion, Duke, our rescue pup, who's now 11 years old. He and I walk the fields and the riverbanks and the forests around where we live. And we see the good and bad of farming. Our neighbours include these 40 cows that are grazing wonderfully the rich, rough pasture of the River Rother where we live. It's a sight to behold. Well, everything is good. And I remember one morning when Duke and I went for a particularly long walk, and we came across something which stuck with me and actually inspired me to write 60 harvests left. We came across a tractor pulling a plough. Nothing unusual in that. We stood and watched in the morning sun as the tractor ploughed its lonely furrow up and down, and the dust was going up into the air and catching the sun like an aura. It was beautiful. But after a moment, I thought, hang on, there's something wrong. There's something missing. There are no birds behind the plough. And then I saw that the tractor was ploughing across the public footpath, which gave me carte blanche to go and get a bird's eye view of the soil just as everything would turn. I looked. You know what I saw? Nothing. Not a single worm or beetle or other bug trying to get back into their home. Their world just turned upside down. It was lifeless. It was sand. Duke and I, we could have been walking on the moon. That field was being ploughed with maize, which is a common feed crop, a common crop that is fed to factory farmed animals. And this maize corn was grown using chemical pesticides and fertilizers, which helped the crop to grow, but demised the soil. So much so that we would see the soil gushing into the river when it rained. And that cornfield nearby reminded me of seeing cornfields flowing green oceans of corn, GM corn, in Nebraska, in the Midwest of America, which is the heartland of the place really where factory farming started in the middle of the last century. But more recently than that, I've seen cattle feedlots in Nebraska. And I remember going up to one of these cattle feedlots, and I remember seeing hundreds of cattle crowded together in barren pens with not a blade of grass inside. And I remember as I was going towards it thinking how noisy it must be. But it wasn't. It was hush, more hush. And those cattle, they had no shade. And they were in the midsummer sun, Nebraskan heat. And what they were doing was just from time to time trying to get into each other's shadow. That is a factory farm, and in America those farms have burgeoned, and it's something which has swept across much of the Western world and has now gone around the world. What factory farming entails, as this room will be familiar, so I won't linger, is chickens taken out of woodland edges and pasture and put in cages so small they can't stretch their wings. Pigs are kept, these mother pigs kept in farrowing crates so narrow they can't turn around for weeks at a time, made to face the wall. Cattle taken out of pasture. Remember that 2/3 of our agricultural land in Britain is pasture. Increasingly in this country, they're being taken out and put into mega dairies where they never see a blade of grass. Factory farming is something which has taken off in a mega farm kind of way, very, very big industrial farms. And it's something which most people are opposed to. It's something which the government has stated that it's opposed to. Someone who I admire in a non-political way, Michael Gove, when he was Secretary of State for DEFRA, the Department for Farming and the Rural Environment, if you like. He made a strong statement against mega farms in 2017. Since then, the number of mega farms in this country has risen by a third. We have more than 1,000 US-style mega farms in this country. Thankfully, not quite as eye-popping as this one, but getting there. This is a US mega farm. Here, I just want to tell you a very quick story that 60 Harvests Left, a travelogue built around going to see some of the flashpoints of food for the future. I was going out to see this farm in the Midwest of the States, where 100,000 cattle were kept in one spot. And I was going to put up a drone and get an aerial shot. I was unable to because of COVID. So I was home with Duke on the farm. But I found a way of getting the shot. I found a way of getting over my own technophobia. And I managed to actually scour the world for the world's biggest cattle feedlots using Google Earth. And it was amazing. I could zoom in and zoom out, and I could get that feeling as if I was flying. And I could get these pictures as if I was there. I could even see the make and model of the cars outside the offices and the flags that were flying. It was incredible. And I found some of the world's biggest factory farms, even bigger than this feedlot in the States. I found the biggest feedlot having 160,000 cattle in South Africa, just outside Johannesburg, geared towards feeding hungry people in Africa. No, it was for export to the Middle East and China. But having gone through this experience, I felt, going around the world in 80 minutes, I felt intoxicated. So much so that through my earpiece, I could hear our 40 cows, our neighbours' 40 cows. They were louder than ever. And I thought, my goodness, it's really heightened my senses. I took the earpieces out. And I kid you not, I could still hear them. And the reason for that was for the first and only time they had actually broken out of the river valley and they were standing in our front lawn. And yes, they left cow pats on the lawn. That was the alternative title for the book. But we went with 60 Harvests Left because it's about a warning made by the UN that carry on treating the soil like we do, like those maize farms and like this, then our soils could be gone within a lifetime. No soil, no food. Game over. Farming is a problem for not just for animal welfare and farmed animals, but also for wildlife. Barn owls, for example, have been declining along with skylarks and starlings and all sorts of other farmland specialists. But it's not just birds. It's also pollinating insects that are required for the very existence of a third of all our food worldwide, bees in rapid decline. Mammals too. When did you last see a hedgehog? Well, actually, I live on a farm. I've been there over 5 years. I've never seen a hedgehog around the farm, not even dead on the road. Since the beginning of this century, their numbers have halved again. And seabirds, from penguins to puffins to these sooty terns, are also affected because factory farms are not only eating grain, but also vast amounts of fish that are scooped up. A fifth of the world's fish catch never reaches the human mouth. It goes to feed factory farmed animals, leaving birds like this starving. So how does this all work then? Well, it works because of the two sides of factory farming. So very quickly, we all know about one side where the animals are kept caged, crammed and confined, which looks like a space-saving idea, doesn't it? Use a vast acreage of arable land elsewhere to feed the animals. And we do that intensively, of course, and fertilizers in the way that I described near home. And what happens with that is industrial crop production means that the fields start to get bigger, and as they get bigger, so the trees and the bushes and the hedges disappear. And then in come the chemicals, pesticides, and the fertilizers, which means that the wild flowers that provide the seeds and home for the insects, they all disappear. And with that goes the food for the birds, the bats, the bees, and just about everything else. And take that crop and we feed it to the factory farmed animals, who, in the final disappearing act, waste the vast majority of the food value in terms of calories and protein in conversion to factory farm meat, milk, eggs. We have factory farming to feed the world, right? That's what they say. Actually, in that equation, we waste enough food to feed 4 billion people on the planet. That is half of humanity today. The reason why the dreadful war in Ukraine has surfaced food security problems and caused them is surfaced. The food security problem comes from the way we keep farmed animals. So, how does this affect us? So why have we got 60 harvests left then? Let's put all this together. Well, it's because what we've been doing since the middle of last century, since factory farming was born in the Midwest plains of America, we've been tearing up the contract with the soil. To understand what I mean by that, we have to scroll back 10,000 years ago when we as a species, we made a fundamental decision. We were going to move away from being nomads, hunter-gatherers, and we were going to settle and become agriculturalists. And in that moment, we signed a contract with the soil. Look after the soil, and the soil will look after us. And it worked with a few hitches pretty well for 10 millennia. Until after the middle of last century, after the Second World War. We could go into lots of detail, but I won't for now. But essentially what we've been doing since then is taking the farmed animals off of the land. They used to be part of mixed rotational systems where they would naturally fertilize the land, and still could. Instead, we put them into those factory farms, and we separated animals from the crops, and we produce the crops in the way that we just described, which undermines that soil, that tearing up that contract. And soil is now disappearing. Because of your proximity to home fen, you'll be aware of this, but a lot of people are not. It's pretty difficult to get a handle on a visual of soil disappearing. You'll know that the top of a home fen post is where the soil was in 1851. Down here is where it is now. Michael Gove, when he was Secretary of State, he reckons that the peat soils in the fens have 30 to 40 years left. All of this is staggeringly inefficient, coming to our alternative protein conversation. Food production covers half the habitable land surface of the planet. It is the most dominant thing we do on Earth. And 83% of that is devoted to animal products. Well, let's think about the return on investment All of that land devoted to animal products, which give us more than a third of our protein. Humanity is plant-based powered. 18% of our calories. Essentially, more greenhouse gases than all of the direct emissions of transport, the world's planes, trains, and cars put together. 40% of our global grain harvest goes to feed intensively reared animals. As we mentioned, and it's worth putting up again, enough to nourish half the people on the planet today. What are we doing? We are consuming the future. That's what we're doing. This idea that society can go on with this perpetual summer is nothing more than an illusion. What it means, and here's the good news is that change is going to happen. Change is inevitable, and so all of us that can see what change needs to be and want to see animals treated better, the natural world appreciated, people given decent food and social justice. Well, this is our moment. Our moment is going to be fueled by the fact that the winds of change, when you see the climate movement, the collapse of the rise in understanding of what's happening with nature, all of that is a wind of change that's sweeping along, like those big winds in the Midwest plains. And what we need to do is put up the biggest sail as a change movement to capture those winds and drive them in the right direction. What does the right direction look like? Well, 3 R's: regeneration, rethinking protein, and rewilding, not least the soil. Soil is rewilding's biggest opportunity in this country and much of the world. We will come on to that in a moment. Regeneration. What are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about returning farmed animals to land, getting them out of those factory farms, going beyond this segregation of crops on one farm with chemicals and animals in factory farms, mixing it up. In fact, I spent the day here with a friend, John Shropshire from G's Fresh near Ely, who is embracing regeneration in his farmed model. 7,000 hectares he farms in this area, and he's bringing farm animals back to that. So regeneration is about mixing it up. It's about having a mix of crops moving in harmony with farmed animals, rebuilding the soil. And is this fanciful? Well, in the book I talk about a range of farmers that I've met, but one of them, a guy called Tim Main in Basingstoke in Hampshire. He farms a very big farm. It's 10 times bigger than the average UK farm. When he took it over, it was an intensive crop farm. That's all it did, crops and chemicals. But he noticed that his soil was declining, its yields were declining. And what he could have done is dialed up the chemical man to be somewhat stronger. But he didn't. He put away the chemicals in the barn, saved himself £700 a hectare, and brought farmed animals back into the mix. Now cattle are followed by sheep, are followed by pigs, are followed by chickens, are followed by crops, and his yields bounce. His farm is in so much better shape, and he's a happier person. The second R is rethinking protein. You see, to fit within planetary boundaries, we've got to adjust our diets, and as it stands, we're eating too much meat and dairy from out-farmed animals. That is the scientific fact. So we need to reduce global consumption of animal products by 50%. In the UK and EU, because we're a high consuming area, we need to reduce by 70%. And if we're going to show leadership and save the planet in the time we've got left, as it is not very long, we need to start setting ourselves ambitious targets. 70% by 2030. In the States, just to give you a feel, 80% reduction is what is needed there. So there's a range of things that we can do here. One of them is to embrace plants. We can eat plants as they come. So John Shropshire here at G's Fresh, if you bought celery and beetroot and things of this nature from supermarkets, probably bought some of his stuff, and it's wonderful products. But the fact is that people have an appetite for meat. The fact is that there are more people eating more meat than ever before. So the challenging imperative is, how are we going to change things? How are we going to turn things around? Well, one way is by looking at plant-based meats. And they're getting better all the time. Pat Brown, the CEO of Impossible Foods, he says, unlike the cow, we're getting better at making meat every single day. More and more we like. But there's a new game in town, which is real meat without the animal. Cultivated meat, cultured meat, meat from stem cells, taken from a harmless biopsy from donor animals, a small number of donor animals, and then grown in a bioreactor. As it stands, the research suggests that it will be a game changer in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Much lower greenhouse gas emissions, a fraction of the land use. And it's starting to happen. The first commercial sale has already started to happen in Singapore. A couple of companies are just one more regulatory step away from commercial sales in the US, where this is much needed, because the US, of course, is one of the world's highest consumers of meat. I reckon that will be widely available within the next 5 to 10 years. And the interesting thing is that when cultivated meat takes off as a production commodity and the price drops, it will cut the legs of factory farming very quickly. And it will cut the legs of factory farming for the very reason that factory farming has succeeded. Factory farming has succeeded because of cheap, anonymous meat. Cheap meat in the freezer, very badly labelled. Who cares where it comes from? Cheap, let's buy it. Cultivated meat will strip that market away and replace it, without a shadow of a doubt, in my view. But there is another one, for those that might not be liking cultivated meat. And here I'm talking, my appeal to the movement is away from tribalism. So one of the things that I talk about in a sense in the book is that what I try to do is put a range of solutions on the table, because the different solutions are going to be applicable to different parts of the world in different contexts. It's not going to be one size fits all. What works in America may not work in Malawi, for example. So trying to look at a range of solutions and go beyond tribalism. And what do I mean by tribalism? Well, for anyone close to the farming and animal advocacy movement, you'll know that regenerative farmers tend to hate vegans, and vegans tend to hate regenerative farmers. And both of those tend to hate cultivated meat. And so it's divided. And so who wins? Status quo, not humanity. But here's another option, precision fermentation, which is taking an age-old way of producing food and giving it a twist. Think bread and wine. Microbes and ingredients in stainless steel vessels. And if you program, when you program microbes and you put in the right ingredients, what you get out is precise molecules, precise proteins. So, for example, a lot of plant-based foods, the reason why they're still quite expensive is because they rely on soya isolate, which is an isolate from soya. So you have to grow all the soya, which is a big fat and a great cost, just to get this ingredient. Precision fermentation, you can produce just the ingredient, bringing down the cost and reducing the fat. There's no animal involved. If you produce, and here you can produce animal proteins, but without a single animal being involved. It can be 100 times more land efficient. And I think the other thing about this, I say it really so that it may so it, as a thought cartoon. If you know the DNA, or if you know the molecular basis of a protein, you can produce it. So if you get a woolly mammoth fossil, for example, with and you can find the code, you can produce a woolly mammoth burger. How cool is that? A woolly mammoth burger. Not suggesting we all want to eat it, maybe we do. But what a fantastic thing to be able to do, so much more efficiently than factory farming. The third of the R's is rewilding. And here is where we get to the soil, because I believe we should, for the soil's sake, bring back the elephant. We brought back the beaver, there's been talk of wolves and lynx and all of these things. How about it? How about here in the fens, we bring back these guys? What do you think? Yeah? Just think of all the poop that would bring fertility, right? I'm joking, actually. When I'm talking about bringing back the elephant, I'm not quite talking about big animals with floppy ears and long trunks. I'm talking about bringing back the elephant's weight of biodiversity, which should be under every healthy patch of soil. Every patch of soil, as big as the football pitch that Man City and Arsenal are playing on tonight, that should have 5 tons of life living under it. It shouldn't be wormless like the field that I described at the beginning. It should have up to 4 million worms every football pitch size, 13,000 species. You count them all, up to 5 tons of life. So how do you reach the point where every user of soil, every soil, as many living organisms, the sort of people on the planet, that's 8 billion. Well, as I saw this morning, John Shropshire's farm, it's pretty straightforward. You farm in harmony with nature, and with animal welfare, and with food nutrition in mind. What you do is you mix it up. You have a rich diversity of crops rotating around the farm. You can be covered up using cover crops, no exposed soil. That's what went wrong in the Dust Bowl of America. Soil was exposed and the wind swept it out. We see that here in the fens. Alternatively, and more usually in Britain, open fields means that the rain washes it out into the rivers, which is why rivers look like cappuccino after it rains. Right? That's soil. And then they call it silt when it gets into the river. See the sleight of hand in the English language. So mix it up, keep it covered up, leave it the right way up. Who wants their home turned upside down every spring? What a bore. Leave the soil the right way up and turbo boost the soil fertility by returning farmed animals to land. Here's a very simple, a very straightforward, very practical and beautiful way of saving the future for us all. So what needs to be done? In summary then, move to regenerative farming. Put away the industrial agricultural model. Reduce our meat and dairy from farmed animals. Replace it with cultivated meat, precision fermentation, farm-based. And respect animals as sentient living creatures. We should do it like our future depends on it. What we can do as change makers, all of us, is we can join the movement. There are many strands to the movement. But when I'm involved in this compassion world farm, we are running a campaign, End of the Line for Factory Farmers. It's a global campaign calling on world leaders to have a global agreement on food that moves beyond factory farming. Because only that, we can talk about this afterwards, but only that actually will make the climate agreement, the biodiversity agreement, the food security agreements, which are in place at the UN. Only a food agreement can make those others successful. So, we've saved the world. We've got rid of the factory farms. We brought the farmed animals back onto the land. There's far fewer of them. And we've gotten to about 2060, where we as a species have learned to live in harmony with nature, and we've relearned the art of regenerative farming. We've brought the animals back and they've boosted the soil. At that point, society will be faced with another choice, a very happy choice, what I call the cart horse moment for meat. We will get to the point where we can decide as a society whether we want to have farmed animals kept for meat as something which goes into the past, like cart horses do here in Cambridge. I didn't see many today. I saw bikes, I saw cars. I bet we went back 100 years or more, they were playing with cart horses. So, back to the sooty tern, a victim of factory farming. We have this idea that we can save humanity. Because as David Attenborough says, it's not about saving the planet will still be here, it is about saving ourselves, right? And if we wake up to the reality that things are running out, then let's embrace those beautiful, those life-affirming solutions. And the great thing is, it may feel awkward at first, there may be difficult questions, will it cost more? Things of that nature. But a bit like, I took this picture of this parent sooty tern with her egg. I was really pleased with the egg picture, and then I realised that actually the egg was hatching. And it's like this idea, these difficult moments, these awkwardnesses, these tensions. Well, let's sit with it. Let's put a big sail. Let's create that movement for a better world. And in this way, we'll see gawky little chicks of ideas spreading their wings and becoming beautiful. Jesus College, Cambridge, what we do now has never mattered more. We can all play our part. We can seize the power of our plate 3 times a day by eating more plants, less and better meat and dairy, and by better, I mean ensuring it doesn't come from factory farms. Pasture-fed, free-range, organic, they're the ones to look for. Thank you so much for creating a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a brilliant, inspiring talk, and I hope people will reflect on that and how they should, change actions. We do now have time though for questions and hopefully some answers. I think we have the microphone ready to go. So we have some. If you're online, please do type them in. We have some already, but I think there's a question right at the back there.
Hey, so the way I see it, the farmers and the landowners are also financially incentivized to keep the soil healthy. Like otherwise, the value of the land is going to decrease in the future. So, where are the economic incentives going wrong if they're not currently keeping the soil healthy?
Well, there are no real incentives to maintain soil health, not on a big enough scale at all at the moment. At the moment, globally, $700 billion go to subsidize agriculture. That's $1 million every minute, somewhere in the world. £3 billion every year subsidizes agriculture. That's our money, taxpayers' money in this country. Most of it goes to incentivize the wrong thing. Climate damaging, environmentally damaging, soil damaging agriculture. So what we need to do is to redirect those subsidies in the way that I think you're suggesting, redirect those subsidies to encourage a move away from industrial agriculture to regen. It simply isn't enough to see maintaining soil health as a bit of a sticking plaster, where maintaining soil health means really you just slow down the rate of decline. We don't have time for that anymore. What we need to do is to full on incentivize a change in the system of farming in this country and throughout the world.
Question right at the back there.
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing in every way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I have an understanding that many people suffer from serious nutritional deficiencies that are caused by food that is grown in soil that is exactly as you said, nutritionally deficient. So from a human health perspective, I guess this is as much a comment as it is a question. Clearly there's a health issue at stake. So on this one point with the soil deficiency, can that not be an incentive from a health perspective?
Thank you. That is a great comment, a brilliant point, and the answer is yes. Healthy soil produces healthy food. Bad soil produces, or bad soil practices produces bad food. And if you go back to the factory farming aspect, for example, compared with free range or pasture-fed meat, the factory farmed, the feedlot meat can be twice as high in saturated fat or more, lower in omega-3s and other health-giving proteins. Put it another way, as chicken has intensified over the decades, when my mother started buying chicken as a treat in the 70s, compared to when she was buying chicken, the ultra factory farmed cheap chicken today has got up to 3 times the saturated fat, a third as protein. So coming to your nutritional point, which is an excellent one, if you're trying to get protein into you, think how much more saturated fat you are eating from the thing which is sold as healthy, but isn't, chicken. So it's a thesis all of its own. Healthy soil, nature-friendly farming practices produces better, nutritionally dense food. Thank you so much for your point.
So can I just bring in a question to you from online? So Jenny Chapman asks, what's the biggest hurdle to the adoption of cultivated meat in the UK, in your view?
Okay, so I think the first hurdle is regulatory. So the science is there to produce it, but the regulation hasn't caught up. The only country in the world that has regulated for the commercial sale of some cultured meat is Singapore. In the US, 2 companies are now just one last regulatory leap away from being able to sell it in the commercial marketplace. Once that regulatory hurdle is overcome, then it's a question of scale. And that is a matter of then finding investment. Investors that are interested in this area, a guy called Jim Mellon, for example, who's just written a new book on this subject, he believes, and I've no reason to doubt him, that that successful ventures, where there's an opportunity, investment will come. So I do expect investment to flow into this new meat product that I believe will be the renewable energy of food. People want to eat meat, this will be meat, but without the climate, nature, animal welfare downsides.
I mean, I've been fascinated by this for a long time, since I mentioned Andreas Forjaks and Modern Meadow, who was trying to have the same regulatory problems, but it's very hard to get it solved. And I think for me, it's one of the big tests will be when somebody like McDonald's says, you know, the anonymous meat we've been using, instead we'll do it like this, you know, not like McDonald's, but you know, it will happen at some point.
Yeah.
Can I do another online question?
Please.
From Josh Davis. And Josh says, to facilitate this transition from intensive agriculture towards nature-based recovery, what skills do you feel are of greatest importance to farmers and land managers? If you were to now invest in any key elements of human skills, what would they be? What would we need to teach farmers, land managers, anybody who's involved in this area?
A reawakening, really, a relearning. We are where we are thanks to 70 years of government policy, of government subsidy funding, of education. Every agricultural facility on the land, just about, has been teaching farmers to go do farming the wrong way, soil damaging, animal unfriendly, nature destroying way. And so it's about relearning. And this is what we were talking about this morning up at G's Fresh at Barway in Ely, near Ely. Essentially, they've been going through this reawakening. They've been relearning how to work with the soil, how to replenish. And what they're seeing is they're starting now to get record yields. They're starting to get all sorts of bounce backs as a result. And and to be really clear and to talk about it from Compassionate World Farming's point of view, the best people to mentally retrain farmers is other farmers, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial. If you say to farmers, in many cases, we're not making much of a financial living, you need to make less money to do something good. That's a hard pitch. Yeah. Because if you say that you'll actually get better yields, it'll be better for you. Yeah. Let's have some questions here. You have one over there. Can you wait for the microphone?
If you don't mind, can I take a slightly different line?
Please.
I'm a member of a number of international climate change committees. I've heard many times arguments, and you put it very well, that the problems we're in, very clear. But I don't see that anything is happening, or very, very little is happening. I think, well, I'd like to hear from you. Why and how can you be sure that something will happen? There are people who predicted this problem 50 years ago. Everything is always on the increase with time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear you, and I'll be honest with you, when I look at the statistics, when I look at the data, when I live with the data, it's a hard thing to live with. I think the difference between the predictions that were made 50 years ago is that 50 years ago, there were not 8 billion people, soon to be 10, 11. There were not clear signs that we're busting planetary boundaries on nitrogen already, biodiversity going down the pan. Climate is getting there, but actually it will be third in the league table of planetary boundaries that we're busting. I think we're 50 years ago, we were not at the tipping point. Now we are. And that is why change is inevitable. So what the statistics say, I hesitate saying this because but it's important to understand that change is not an option. Change is not an option. The only option is whether we choose to change or whether we get changed. A child born today, he, she or they, by the time they're 18, they will look out on the world currently as it stands, if we don't do something, where we have triggered catastrophic climate change, where nature will be down to a very small percentage of what it was 50 years ago, and where we have 1 billion more mouths to feed and a third less soil. What happens with that is mass migration, mass starvation, mass conflict. I wrote about this in 60 Harvests Left in the winter, just before we get to the spring, which is the joyous hope. And I really toned down that section because I was writing freely about what that leads to. And what it leads to is world-ending conflict. And I toned it down in the book because really the whole threat of nuclear war was behind us. It was something which I remember from my childhood, but it wasn't something that was in mainstream psyche anymore. Since the book has gone out to the printers, we've had the Ukrainian war. We had the test, the first test in 30 years of the 4-minute warning. They called it something else, but that's what happened. 3 p.m. on Sunday. That was the 4-minute warning. So that is the trigger point that's ahead of us. That's why change is inevitable. So it's down to us to decide whether we come in for a life-affirming landing or a difficult one. But thank you for your question.
I'll take another question. I'll take the one nearest to me first. Discuss our question.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm just interested to know, sort of in terms of the main picture of food production, what your thoughts are on the research going into DNA modification of fruit and vegetables, because I know there's some real knowledge doing that. And I know that's a big step away from thinking about soil, but I just wondered what your view was.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. Well, I guess my first question is, why are we trying to do this? So, of course, gene editing, so gene modification, is the latest branch of GMO. And I'm not opposed to GMO, and actually I can see in very limited instances, I can see good things coming out of gene editing. For example, if we're going to continue producing eggs like we do, then we'll get the hens out of battery cages and gene edit the hens so that when they are breeding new hens, the eggs that are breeding new hens only produce female eggs, because then you don't have to kill the male chicks, you see. So I do see some benefits in limited circumstances, but generally my question is, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to do genetic modification because it's necessary and beneficial, or are we doing it for someone's profit? And if we go to GMO, which is where most of the modification these days has become practical, GMO cereals, for example, is big business, and it's trumpeted as something which has been done to feed the world. The statistical reality is that the majority of GM crops are feeding factory farms, not feeding the world.
Because I understood that they were trying to sort of distance themselves from GMO I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand the difference, but this DNA modification is not the same, and I don't. Yeah.
So, GMO, that's the genetic modification, is essentially or transgenic GMO is what we've generally been talking about in the past, where you're taking genes from one species and putting them into another. With gene editing, you're not doing that. You're just altering the DNA profile. You're editing little bits of the DNA profile of the same species. So it's not transgenic, it's not transiting one gene from an entity into another. It's just doing an editing job. But I still answer the question, why are we doing this? Is this a technical fix? Because big ag, coming back to your earlier question about how we need to change farming practices, one of the ways is to decouple farming from big ag, because it's big ag that sells the chemicals, the fertilizers, the cages, the grain, and the GM and gene edited products to farmers who think they're doing the right thing because that's what they're told to do to make a living. Well, actually, what it does is increase their cost, when we know that the actual selling price of their product is very low. So who benefits from this? The big pharmaceutical companies, the big chemical companies, and so on. And in this case, the GM companies, the gene editing companies.
Can we have an online question from our most regular attendee called Anonymous Attendee? It's on the features on Zoom. Can I ask you about insect protein?
Yes.
Should we be eating more insects? Is that part of the answer?
No, it's not, dear Anonymous. Thank you for the question. So why do I say that? Well, insect farming is, here we go again, creating the mistakes of the past. We've got sentient beings, wild and farmed, and we give them a terrible time. And with insects, in terms of the number of individuals that you're giving a difficult time to, we can multiply that many times over very quickly through the insect farming. And are insects sentient? Well, we know that at least some of them are. Bees, for example. And hey, let's not write them off as being unself-aware. Ants, certain ant species have been studied, and there is a test, an awareness test, that very few animals pass. If I put, it's a mirror test, right? If I put Duke in front of the mirror, he wouldn't pass the mirror test because he wouldn't recognize himself in the mirror. He just wouldn't be bothered. But certain ants, if you put a dot on their head and you put them in front of the mirror, they will try to wipe the dot off their head. They're aware themselves in the same way as we are, right? So why do we want to put them into a potential factory farming scenario? Well, if you're unconvinced by the sentience argument and giving insects the benefit of the doubt, well, let's also remember that insect farming is going to be on the same principle as factory farming chickens and pigs, which is taking human edible crops and feeding them to insects. Now, insects will convert them into protein with less waste than pigs and chickens, but still it will be wasteful. You'll be better off eating the plant protein directly.
Okay, and there's a question back there.
Right. So there's going to be a lot of speculation in this question.
Okay, can you keep it to a short amount of explanation?
Sure, yeah. A lot of the solutions you suggested to the various problems you have seem quite technology heavy. So the background meat is probably the prime example of that.
Yeah.
Call me a Luddite, but I tend to think that sort of the more stages we have of any process, the more chance there is for unforeseen problems. So the question is, do you think it's even feasible to feed the current population using, for want of a better word, traditional, let's say, methods that existed 200 years ago? Is that even possible, or do we have to sort of bring big GM and factories and so on to
Yeah, thank you for your question, a really good one. The answer is that it is perfectly possible to feed the world on regenerative, nature-friendly farming. And let us remember that if the soil runs out because of industrial farming, we won't be feeding anyone. It's as simple as that. So something has to give. But the whole idea that we are experiencing a food shortage now or at 9, 10, 11 billion people is fictitious. I've run the numbers. The fact is that we produce enough food for twice the population on the planet. We just waste half of it. The biggest portion is the 4 billion people's worth that we waste on factory farms. The next biggest portion is the stuff we throw in our bin, or get wasted in the different supply chains. So it's not a question of have we got enough food to feed everyone, because we have. So we just need to step away from trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Thank you for your question.
We're beginning to run out of time, so if I can ask people to do brief questions, then we will get there. So I've got a question there, and you have the last one.
Thank you for a fantastic talk, very inspiring.
Thank you.
60 Harvests Left. Who's the audience for this book? We all have gardens, right? I'm speaking personally. Little garden, yeah, you can let things kind of do what nature intended. What about Britain's community of farmers? Just talk about our country. What about our farmers? Have they read the book? Do you speak to them? Are they doing it?
Yeah, so the target audience is, I call it a Waterstones audience. So it's a mainstream read. You don't need to be a farmer or a specialist. In fact, actually, it's better if you're not. It's based on stories, so a Waterstones audience. Farmers are featured in it. It's given us access to talk to a whole range of farming interests and to strike up friendships, like with John Shropshire up the road. In terms of farmers, who should speak to farmers, I truly believe that the most effective way is to inspire the conversation and let farmers speak to other farmers. And that's what we try to encourage. Thank you.
Thank you. Other from here?
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. I don't have a question so much as just a couple of additional comments to add on to the previous things that were said. So regarding insects, I completely agree. I was recently at a conference where someone from the Insect Institute spoke, and they're extremely worried that there are essentially currently no standards for insect welfare, both in how they are reared or in how they are sorted. And at the moment, microwaving them seems to be a popular one, which I can't imagine is very good. Yeah, so do check those out. And from a more sort of scientific, practical perspective, it does seem better than rather than trying to figure out how to do insect farming better, that it would be more efficient simply to jump immediately over to precision fermentation or lab-grown alternatives, which seem much more promising in the long run. And then just finally, an additional comment on GM, that as far as precision fermentation and lab-grown meat is concerned, it may be required or at least very useful to be able to modify, for example, plant feedstock that goes into producing better protein alternatives. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, Lucy, you deserve the final question, and thank you very much for helping us plan all of this and bring it all together.
Thank you, thank you. So I was wondering, you were emphasizing the role of cultivating a lot, and I think it can be really tempting to kind of rely on technology solving that problem, but I do think that still a broad consumer change needs to happen, and I'm wondering, how do you envision bringing about this mass change in our behavior?
Lisa, I completely agree that that technology can only take you so far, and that's why I put regeneration first, because I do believe that we need to change our farming practice to be in harmony with nature. I see the technology, cultivated meat, being able to allow people to continue to eat meat, but without the downsides. How do we get that to be taken up through government policies, company policies, and through a global agreement by the United Nations to essentially reorientate food policy globally. It happened 70 years ago. It needs to happen again if we're able to have this conversation, if the next generation is going to be able to have this conversation in 70 years' time. So government policies, company policies, the UN, is this happening? It's starting to. Compass Group, which is the largest food service sector company on the planet, their UK and Ireland division has already set a target to reduce meat and dairy in its supply chains by 40% by 2030, to shift over to regenerative supply chains. Aldi and Lidl in Germany have begun to make really interesting steers on this. The government's food czar, Henry Dimbleby, who I spoke to on stage, interviewed on stage in Oxford, sorry, Cambridge, but Oxford a couple of weeks ago. His national food strategy is essentially guiding the government, advising the government to set a 30% reduction target for meat and dairy in this country. So that's the way. It's got to come from the top.
Well, Philip, thank you very much for such an inspirational, impassioned, effective talk, and it's been great to have you with us. So
thank you.
There are copies of the book. If you're in the room, there are copies of the books available at the back of the room. If you are online in all good bookshops near you, I'm sure there are copies available. That's all we have tonight, but could I just take the opportunity to tell you about some of the other events we have? We run lots and lots of things on many different subjects. Next week we have Leroy Logan, who is a police officer, was chair of the Black Police Association, very involved with the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, the Olympics, and talking about his life as a cop. And the week after that, we're talking about fashion sustainability. With Riccardo Bellini, who's the chief executive of Chloe, the fashion brand, who are really trying to move towards that area, and there's more still to come. So thank you very much for being with us, whether you are online or in person. Enjoy the rest of your evenings. Bye.